Thank you for joining us for this special and very important interview where we'll be speaking with Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance, the Honourable Minister Gail Teixeira, on a very, very important report, the Gender Gap Report, just to have an understanding of everything that is happening for Guyana in that report. Minister Teixeira, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And this is, I think, we've got some good news, and it's always good to bring you good news.
Definitely.
And so the World Economic Forum has an annual report on the global gender gap. And particularly, a number of the reports, particularly by the UN, show that in many countries for women to become equal to men, it will take over 100 years.
Oh.
And so this is kind of pushed for greater analysis and measurements and indicators to try to see where the gaps are, particularly in countries, in regions, and so forth. So that for Guyana, we've done well. And so, for example, the overall gap index for Guyana in comparison with 146 countries, we've moved from the rank of 53rd to 35 in 1 year.
In 1 year.
So that's an amazing achievement for us. And then economic participation opportunities, we've moved from 105th rank to 53rd rank. In education attainment, we've moved from 91st of 146 to 57. And then health and survival, we were first with other countries in 2021, and now we're the same, first in 2022. In political empowerment, we moved from the rank of 44 to 42nd in the world. So we're doing quite well, and to break that down, because I think that many times, people make comments about Guyana, and these reports are very useful to show the progress that Guyana is making, because these are measured from a variety of documents, the Interparliamentary Union, World Bank, IMF, OECD, a number of agencies. These data is drawn from. So that, for example, we move from 53rd to 35. That's a big leap in 1 year. Then in economic participation, as I said, in the areas of legislatures, senior officials and managers, Guyana ranks 17th globally, 17 for gender equality in these positions, with an outstanding score of 87.9%.
And this is over?
This is within the year. In the areas of professional and technical workers, Guyana ranks first with other countries in the global index, tying with some of the most progressive and developed countries globally. In education attainment, we have an exceptional level of literacy with a score of 0.985 out of a maximum score of 1. So the maximum score is between 0.9 to 1, and we're 0.0985. Guyana is also tied first with other countries, with a number of other countries, for enrollment in both secondary and tertiary education. And so this is also comparable with a number of more developed countries in the world. And primary education enrollment was not measured in 2022. So in some indicators that they use, they don't measure them every year. Health and survival, we placed first, as I said, with 27 other countries globally.
Right.
And we're first in terms of equal sex ratio. In other words, the number of babies born are equally male and female. Because in some countries you have disproportionate number of girls or boys, and particularly in countries where people, by a number of devices, through what you call ultrasounds and so on, make a preference for boys over girls. And this is not a problem here. We're also placed first with other countries on the global scale for life expectancy. So that's pretty good news too. Regarding women in parliament, Guyana is ranked 37th on the global index, while the number of women in ministerial positions ranks 40th on the global index.
And this is out of 146 countries.
Yeah.
Right.
Whilst Guyana has only had one female head of state, it is still ranked 50th on the global index in comparison with a number of other countries. One of the interesting ones, which I thought that the public may want to know, is access to financial services, access to land assets, and access to non-land assets. Guyana records near equal rights. So this is an important indicator for women because in many countries, access to financial services and land assets are not equal or not even near equal in some countries. Women cannot own unless a man owns it in their names. Right. Inheritance rights for women, widows and daughters is noted in the report to be equal. And I believe this is because of the impact of the recent legislative reform we brought to do regarding inheritance. And so both in terms of the law we brought to do with inheritance and also the one to do with civil unions, of partners inheriting in civil unions. So I think that has brought that change. Civil and political rights, that it is considered that Guyana has equal rights with regards to access to justice. So again, this is the important indicator that women are not discriminated against in terms of access to justice. Family and care. An interesting figure is to do with the age of women at having their first child, their first birth, and the birth of their first child. And that in Guyana has risen to between 26 and 27 years of age, which is a very healthy figure in comparison to some much lower ages recorded across the world. In addition to that, in comparison to Guyana 30 years ago, it is quite a big difference. So although we have teenage pregnancies, they're in the rates between 17 and 19, but the majority of women in Guyana having their first child is in the average age of 26 and 27 years old. Women and men in Guyana, according to the report, have equal rights to divorce. Areas such as parental leave show that women receive parental leave whilst men do not. And one of the issues, reproductive autonomy, which is your right to choose as a woman. And this is a legal fundamental right has been afforded to Guyanese women for decades, for the last over 2 decades. And it is, so that's an important point that is raised, that our women have access and the right to reproductive autonomy without having the approval of a male. And in addition to that, 95.8% of live births are attended by skilled personnel, even despite Guyana's geographic terrain and geographic diversity. So I think that we have done not badly in the past in terms of the report of 2014, 2015, we were making progress. But this is where I think we've made some leaps in the last year. And I think it's important for us to note that and what were the factors that may have contributed to that is something we need to look at now.
Minister, so these are a lot of statistics.
Yes.
And obviously very positive statistics. To have a clearer understanding and explanation of what these statistics mean on the ground and in reality, what from your perspective does this say about the Guyanese society?
Clearly, I mean, there are many issues we deal with the gender gap. We can, as a nation, improve our legislative architecture, our administrative measures and policies and programs, and still there will be men in our society who will be violent towards women. These are social, psychological problems that societies face. But the figures here give an indication of progress, which is important for us as a people, particularly when you look at areas where we've moved from 105th ranking in economic opportunities to 53. That's a huge leap. Again, that goes back to things of programs we do. The programs looking for creation of jobs, the programs to do with investments and micro businesses and improving women's access to, say, microfinancing, improving women's participation in the economy. So that I think this is an important issue, that has shown a major leap forward. Certainly when you look at the number of women who are recorded in the informal workforce, it is quite a large amount. But the fact is that they are increasingly improving their status in terms of further access to finances. So the point about near equal rights to financial services and land assets. For example, with land assets, the fact that women can apply for a house lot in Guyana without having a male partner to sign off of it. In other countries that are not so, say, liberal-minded as Guyana, women would have to have their name on an application with a male.
Yeah.
In Guyana, it does not require that. And so the access to land accesses and near equal is showing up in, say, the housing programs in particular as a critical area in terms of non-land assets. These are buying cars, buying other goods for the house, or construction and things like that. These are where there have been improvements. And financial services. So the program that Minister Vinay Prasad has to do with wind.
Right.
These are programs that accelerate women's access. The programs that Minister Waldron has to do with small businesses and micro businesses. These are accelerating. And I don't think we recognize that there is something going on that's quickly, because sometimes we look and say, well, okay, we see, 50 women get this, but there are 100 women outside. The fact that, 50 women out of have been able to access loans, for example, or small grants, is a major achievement, and therefore all this accumulates in terms of how we're doing. The fact that also, as a Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs, we try to keep up to date with the reports that are required from the UN Human Rights on the Organization of American States. These are where we try to keep up with reports. There are many reports and many questionnaires, but we try to keep up with them because we recognize that many of these, once they become public documents and they're posted, these are documents sometimes that are used in these analyses by the World Economic Forum or by another research group, the group that does the LATOP, I always forget it, Latin American survey, that is, again, pulls sources from similar ones like this. So I think that sometimes we don't measure in a popular way. We, as government ministers, we have to look at data, and Ministry of Finance and the Bureau of Budget Director and so on. We look at the data, a variety, including just budget numbers, but sometimes we don't see the overall picture ourselves sometimes. Yeah. And so I think what this report does is that it collects a series of data that are scattered in many areas of international community in the organizations that assess us, World Bank, IDB, etc. But it shows that there is an accumulative progress by our country, and that obviously helps by the President Ali's programs that have been coming at us at a terrific speed. And the new one that he's introducing, I believe by next year, when there's another report done, it'll show another improvement. The program that he wants to start, I think, on Friday, of Men with a Mission, the 1,000 Men, to try to deal with what are clearly social problems where men are actually lagging behind, or males are actually lagging behind in dropouts and things like that, but at the same time, and social problems and violence, that these are problems that we don't look at, we look at them very narrowly. But if we look at these things as collective, in a collective manner, the WIN program, the GOLD program with the online scholarships, the micro business and loans and things like that, the housing program, these are all in a sense cumulatively improving the quality of life. Yeah. And in fact, because we don't discriminate in Guyana between women and men and say that women can't do this, it automatically, and women, as a woman, women are much more ambitious anyway. We are naturally more ambitious. We want to improve, and maybe that's because women have been lower down for decades ago, and we wouldn't tend to get to the top. And so every woman in Guyana wants to have a house, every woman wants to have nice things in her house, everyone wants to be able to live comfortably. And I think that is that whole energy coming from women in our society too, to access these services. They don't want to get left behind. So when Gold puts out their first tranche of scholarships, they planned for 5,000 scholarships, over 7,000 people applied. 600, I think 420 got scholarships, of which 60% were females, which really showed that women want to have access. They want to be able to get into these programs, and they want to do well. And so I think that this report actually helps us to focus in and to say, look, we are making progress, and of course we want to do better. So the health, and then different years they analyze different things. So this year they dealt with a number of issues. So they didn't deal with things like the workforce and different aspects of the workforce. They dealt more with, in some areas, they didn't deal with a lot with the informal sector either. So the areas where they have not pulled on that data. So different years they may have a slightly different focus or so on. So this year they didn't deal with primary education. They focused on countries with secondary and tertiary education. And by the way, in the Latin America and Caribbean group, Guyana is number 6, which is also a good thing for us.
Yeah.
You know, that we're number 6 in the region, the sub-region. And then of course, for the global context, for us to be number 35, I think of the Caribbean countries that only beat us was Jamaica. They're slightly above us. But we did better than Canada and other countries too. So I mean, when you look at it, the global index, we haven't done badly at all. You know, and I think that is all part of, I think, the energy and the programs and policies of the government since we've come in August 2020 to turn around the economy, to rebalance the society. I think those are all having an impact when you look at this data.
So Minister, we've seen, particularly in this report, that the enrollment in secondary education and primary education, Guyana has ranked first. How did we come about to getting to that place, and what does that say about?
It's taken quite a long time actually. When we left government in 2015, we had already achieved universal primary education. And that was through a number of very targeted programs, particularly in the interior where children were not attending school. And so since we came into government, making sure with limited money in those days to ensure there was a nursery and primary school in every Amerindian community across Guyana. That took a while to do, and then to develop teachers, to train teachers, to send them in and stuff like, particularly bringing people from those areas to be taught as teachers. So that was a big program. In addition to that, the introduction of the school feeding program in Region 9, which was a pilot program around 2006, because it was found that why aren't children attending school? And that was to do with the problem of food and being hungry and having to go long distances. So that led to, as I said, more schools being built within communities, so the distances were shorter. And in addition to that, the school feeding program in Region 9. What that showed by 2008, 2009 was that the attendance in school in Region 9 had shot up because children would be given a meal and snack and things like that. Then the introduction of the school uniform programs. The uniform programs again started. So Region 9 became the region that was spread to the other interior regions, and then Minister Priya now is talking about the programs along the coast. In addition to that, the school uniform program, a uniform voucher allowance program that was started. Many children didn't want to go to school, especially in the interior and rural areas who were poor, because they didn't have proper school clothes or they didn't have proper clothes. And so that program started where the mothers could decide, well, the uniform could go for a little bit more and therefore have a haversack or shoes or socks and things like that. So that program also increased the attendance at school. So the issues of children not being attended because in some cases long distances, food, uniforms, books and so on. So that, in addition to that, in our time we increased the availability of books in the school, the textbooks and things like that. When we've come back into government, we have had to repair some of the damage done. And as you know, we introduced in 2013 the cash care program, which was abandoned from 2015 to 2020, and we reintroduced it. That whole area of every child being registered in schools, you have to be registered. So there's a kind of incentive to make sure your child is registered in schools so that you get the cash care program, which we've increased 3 times already. And so these are issues I think that have really impacted on primary school, which went up to 2015, and then some repair since, and you had COVID at the same time. Right. And I think that's why in the report they may not have dealt with primary issues because of COVID. But the secondary enrollment was similarly to build more high schools, and particularly in the interior high schools with dormitories. So for example, in 92 when we got into office, there was a kind of high school in Mabaruma. And then we had built between 92 and 2014, 13 high schools across the country with dormitories. And this is when you started having universal access to high school education for children in the Amerindian communities. Other than that, there was the Interland Scholarship. If you did well, you then came and went to President's College or whatever. And that was a small number of children. So what you see now is an explosion of children going to schools. I remember going to Paramakatoi sometime around 2013, 2014, and the school was bursting. The dormitories were bursting because the number of children that were coming were higher than what they could keep up with. And so you also have an issue that the fastest growing ethnic group are the Amerindian population. And so what we are looking at now, we'd started looking at it before 2015, before the elections of 2015, and we've gone back to it. And that is to look at the construction of additional high schools with dormitories, and more of those in the various interior areas. And I know Minister Priya, before the sad passing of her father, contacted me about looking at another venue for school with dormitories in Region 7, which is the region I'm responsible for. So that there's one in Warramadong and there's one in Bartika. But we need another one for areas like Midmaz and stuff like that. So that consciousness by the government of, one, the communities want their children to be educated. This is the doorway for opportunities, for access, for training, for work, etc. And so that has had a great impetus. These are things that have really, because although we were doing schools on the coastline, if you didn't deal with the interior, first of all, children would have no access to secondary education. Therefore, they couldn't get into different programs, nursing or university or teaching. And so all these have had an impetus on like what you call like a domino effect. It begins to roll and affect other issues. And so I think these are the accumulation of many programs that were introduced, some of which may, in our impatience, may have taken much longer than we wanted. And in some cases, some of the political environment wasn't always very helpful, and in some cases obstructionist. So that I think we're seeing the fruit of our labor in a report like this. That's why we feel good about it. You know?
Minister, going forward and looking forward to the future, what more can the population expect from the government in order to not only close this gap from the perspective of the Global Gender Gap Report, but in general in terms of uplifting societies and persons in those societies, and women particularly, so that all access or equal access can be given to them in every sector of the country?
Well, I hope to see that in my lifetime. But I know that, I mean, once we have, there are social issues we have to confront. And it is hard sometimes to bring legislation and to have a unanimity or majority support on some pieces of legislation which are controversial. But many times there's a lag between legislation and what society thinks and does. And so I think that the programs we're introducing, the policies, the laws we have amended, and we have constitutional reform coming up which may bring some additional issues, that we still have to pay a lot of attention to the social issues. You see the number of women who have died or murdered recently in the last 5 years, for example. So that these are sometimes reflections not of necessarily economic issues, but mental health issues, issues of people who are prejudicial, men who are prejudicial feel that women don't have rights, and a number of other societal issues. So there's an area for societal interventions, whether it is more skilled people who can do counseling or people who can intervene at that level. But I think that there's a tremendous opportunity, and I think we're grasping it, and we're going to see. One of the issues we have to be careful with, obviously, is that, and this has happened in some countries, although no country in the world where women have received parity, but the issue of male absenteeism or marginalization, not because the women have moved forward, because of other factors. We're not going to accept blame for men being absent. But that, so you have, as long as you have a large percentage of homes that are female-headed, whether by biological mothers, grandmothers, aunties, and so on, this will be always a phenomenon that slows down progress or opportunities or access to opportunities by various people. And so those are big societal issues. That's why I refer back to the President's the Youth Advisory Council to try to get greater participation, young people, both male and female, because they understand some of the social dynamics maybe better than my generation. You know, there are issues going on there that we may not fully appreciate. To get academics to do more analytical and research work for our university, because they're Guyanese, they should understand our culture and how we think and what are some of our issues. So we need to do that, because universities are actually also are supposed to influence society and governments in policy. We're not seeing that kind of intellectual contributions to our country. That's a gap as well. And so there are those kind of issues, but I think that when you look at the different categories here, that in fact we have done well, and that to reach 35th out of 146 countries, coming from where we came from in 92, and where we had to kind of reverse a bit and start over again in 2020, I think is quite an amazing achievement for us. And I think that we can bask in some of our achievements, and that will give us, I think, greater impetus to keep building and to be more creative, even more creative in our programs, so that the initiatives, particularly with vulnerable populations that we have, the old age pensions, all these things that we do, public assistance, the programs with children who are disabled, all of this is accumulating in terms of movement forward, that people are not being, kept back because of these other hurdles they have to overcome. And so if someone decides not to move forward, in a sense it will be their personal decision, not because they're overwhelmed by so many obstacles they have to get through. So I think that these surveys and reports are useful for any country to measure where they're going, where some of the issues they have to still confront. And I think for us that's the case.
Minister Teixeira, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this discussion with me here today.
All right, thank you very much.